If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the week of April 17, 2022. The podcast that feeds snakes to mice. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's deinstitutionalize the news of the bogus. When the COVID pandemic hit, we covered a lot of predictions, and for the most part, we were fairly on the money on which ones would end up being right and which ones would be wrong. Sadly, it seems most of the rest of the world, especially influential people in government and academia, got it wrong. Why? That's what this article in The Atlantic seeks to cover. The first one they mention is one that's being talked about a lot. The inflation we're experiencing, which many economists were predicting, but policymakers insisted would be transitory if it happened at all. Of course, their response isn't, "we were wrong," but they've just switched to, "it's the fault of the greedy corporations." Apparently, corporations weren't as greedy prior to 2020. Going back to August of 2020, many were predicting an eviction tsunami, where 1 in 10 Americans would be evicted for failure to pay rent. Heard everywhere was the screeching of what would happen if government didn't give renters lots of money and let them live rent-free. In reality, evictions actually declined. That same month, surveys were published of the she session, where tons of women, something like 20 to 25%, would leave the workforce or downshift their career. Of course, what people didn't mention was that 20% of men were also considering leaving or cutting back on work. The New York Times said the pandemic will reduce female representation in the workforce for years after the pandemic is over. In reality, the labor force participation rate for women has stayed pretty much the same. Far from tanking the housing market, the pandemic, running contrary to basically everybody's predictions, caused both home prices and home building to soar. And although it's true that pandemic-based stimulus spending caused federal and state deficits to be atypically high, the predictions that this would continue because of low government revenues just hasn't ended up being the case. State revenues had rebounded by the end of 2020, with some reporting surpluses. None of this would have been so bad if the people making bad predictions hadn't shouted down, denigrated, and even canceled the ones who were skeptical of those bad predictions, or even made better predictions of their own. I guess we saw who was worth listening to. The Atlantic article goes into 4 reasons why a lot of these predictions might have failed, the first one being, as the adage goes, fighting the last war. They were treating the pandemic as though it were the 2008 housing market, which, in turn, had been treated like the previous recession with a similar failure of policymakers to make good predictions. Sadly, this article credits government stimulus spending for the reason, even though it was that same stimulus spending that failed to fix the 2008 recession, meaning they're guilty of the same mindset. The fact of the matter is, this wasn't an actual recession. This was an unforeseen circumstance, with supply shocks resulting from both people demanding different products, such as masks, and governments messing with supply chains. But it wasn't the result of malinvestment, which means that people on their own were able to correct for things. Government didn't create the technology that allowed people to work from home. Government didn't order cargo ships to move from badly mismanaged California ports to others such as Charleston that were more efficiently run. And government policy, which has always been centered around stopping people from saving and instead getting them consuming, certainly isn't responsible for record personal savings. Government also had nothing to do with creating the jobs that caused such a swift recovery. In fact, the problem has been there are so many jobs they can't find enough people to work them. Government also isn't in any way responsible for food delivery services, which helped keep restaurants open after states forced them to stop serving customers in person. Government didn't create virtual home tours that helped people buy and sell homes remotely. And they certainly didn't predict the boon this would be to people in rural and remote areas, continuing with their perennial pro-urbanism bias. The second factor they mention is data overload, which just means that central planning doesn't work. We've been told by the central planners that all they need is enough information quickly, and they can make the decisions about your life that you can't. Well, here, they had all the data they could possibly want, and it still failed. The economic calculation problem isn't going anywhere anytime soon. The third one is leftist bias. The She session was predicted to justify universal daycare and paid family leave. The eviction tsunami justified government protectionism for renters. State deficits demanded blue state bailouts. It wasn't any kind of grand conspiracy, it was just the standalone complex. But it does show what happens when politicians, the news media, and big tech show bias in determining what points of view people are and aren't allowed to hear. And the last one was simply underestimating, as economist Michael Strain of the American Enterprise Institute put it, quote, "The resilience, creativity, and ingenuity of people and businesses and workers." People figured out how to deal with things, and the economy returned to normal, which is all government has ever had to do to get people out of any recession. Leave them alone and let them figure it out. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odyssey.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odyssey is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odyssey to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency, without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odyssey.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. So one of the things that didn't work out so well was vaccine mandates. Not only was it not the absolute roadblock to COVID that policymakers were predicting, it was a huge human rights issue. That's what the New Zealand High Court found about Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's vaccine mandate. Ardern, if you recall, is the one who, back in 2018, asked the Supreme Court not to hear Kim.com's appeal because, no joke, they lack jurisdiction. But before then, when she thought the government may have lost, she was demanding a Supreme Court hearing. The High Court ruled that the police and the New Zealand Defence Force cannot be fired for refusing to take an experimental vaccine, which would result in the overthrow of all her vaccine mandates. Apparently in New Zealand, a law that represents a breach of the Bill of Rights is allowed if it's, quote, reasonably justified. You probably don't need me to point out all the problems with that. It generally means their Bill of Rights isn't worth the paper it's printed on. But what does it say when a law doesn't even meet that lax standard? Some 164 police force members and 115 NZDF members were affected by the mandate, which they said was a violation of two clauses. The first is Section 11, which reads, "Everyone has the right to refuse to undergo any medical treatment." The other was Section 13, which reads, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief, including the right to adopt and hold opinions without interference." Since the vaccine is still experimental, it arguably also runs afoul of Section 10, which reads, "Every person has the right not to be subjected to medical or scientific experimentation without that person's consent." Justice Francis Cook dismissed the government's defense that the vaccine wasn't strictly a requirement and they still had the right to refuse vaccination. As we've covered with other cases in the US, even a mandate that isn't a strict requirement has an element of pressure to it, which is enough to constitute an effective requirement. Cook ruled, "The associated pressure to surrender employment involves a limit on the right to retain that employment, which the above principles suggest can be thought of as an important right or interest recognized not only in domestic law, but in the international instruments. The court accepted that vaccination in general has significant health benefits, but the experimental COVID-19 vaccine, to the extent data was available, shows that it just isn't that effective against the Omicron variant, certainly not like it was with earlier strains. Quote, "In essence, the order mandating vaccinations for police and NZDF staff was imposed to ensure the continuity of the public services and to promote public confidence in those services, rather than to stop the spread of COVID-19. Indeed, health advice provided to the government was that further mandates were not required to restrict the spread of COVID-19. I am not satisfied that continuity of these services is materially advanced by the order. COVID-19 clearly involves a threat to the continuity of police and NZDF services. That is because the Omicron variant in particular is so transmissible. But that threat exists for both vaccinated and unvaccinated staff. I am not satisfied that the order makes a material difference, including because of the expert evidence before the court on the effects of vaccination on COVID-19, including the Delta and Omicron variants." Yeah, because again, one thing they didn't even try to show was any scientific justification for the mandates. Even back when the strains of COVID such as Delta and Lambda were effectively controlled among vaccinated populations, there still wasn't any data showing that the mandates themselves either increased the portion of the population that was vaccinated or did anything else to slow the spread. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. So, remember how Democrats were all defund the police and we've got to get these violent racist police under control because we love George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and everything else? On both this podcast and my YouTube channel, I've talked about several actual specific policies that would help. End qualified immunity, end civil asset forfeiture, end police unions, end the militarization of police, make body cam footage required and public, and when it's absent, make police lose their status as a credible witness. And if you want to help minorities, end the war on drugs, gun control, minimum wage, zoning, cash bail, and all the other forms of eugenics imposed on them by both the right and the left. So, to say the least, I didn't really believe the Democrats were all that gung-ho on police reform, and I was right. Joe Biden is promising more money to law enforcement. Democratic governors and mayors are promising more police and greater police pay, and even in completely liberal cities like Los Angeles, they're singing the off-key atonal music of tough on crime. Really, that's right up there with "Think of the Children!" In a debate between mayoral candidates last month, the only difference in the candidates on this issue was who would do more to support the police, including Democrat Rick Caruso, who was calling for adding 1,500 police officers to the LAPD and said, quote, "I stand with our president, Joe Biden, who said, 'Let's fund the police.'" And Democratic Council member Joe Busciano said, quote, "One of my first actions as mayor is going to be to refund the LAPD $150 million. I am the only candidate on this stage who actually wore an LAPD badge and wore a bulletproof vest." In Minneapolis last fall, a campaign to overhaul the police department failed in a very blue city. In Philadelphia 2 years ago, Democratic Mayor Jim Kenney's request for an additional $19 million in police spending was rejected, but this year, they're proposing to add millions on top of the $24 million Kenney proposed. The NYPD is cracking down on homeless, and the state of New York is rolling back bail reform passed just a few years ago. Nevada Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is bragging about how she has, quote, worked closely with law enforcement and says she is, quote, supporting our police. In Washington, D.C., after the city council cut the budget in 2020, they're now hiring hundreds more police. Why is this happening? According to Pennsylvania Governor and Philadelphia Mayor Ed Rendell, it's all about putting popularity over principle. Quote, as dumb as we are, we do listen to the base. The base has been giving it to us left and right. What do you mean cutting police? Go into North Philadelphia, where 99% of the people are African American, and ask them what they think of defunding the police. You wouldn't find 10 people who are in favor. The polls back them up. In January, a Fox survey found that more than 10% of voters trust Republicans to handle crime over Democrats. In an April CBS YouGov poll, only 39% trusted Biden to manage crime. Another January survey found that 70% of Philadelphians rated public safety as the top issue, up from 40% in 2020. 69% of blacks said that there wasn't enough police in the city, compared to 63% of Hispanics and 55% of whites. Only people who were younger, had a college degree, or made more than $100,000 a year said Philadelphia had enough or too many cops. Last month, an NBC News poll found that 73% of voters said they'd be less likely to vote for a candidate who called for defunding the police. And several Democrats have expressed fears that this may lead to Trump being reelected in 2024. All in all, this seems like a missed opportunity. The Democrats could have used 2020 to talk about real police reforms, and maybe people would have listened. As it is, the only side most voters got to hear was the defund the police movement, which has had a disastrous impression on voters. And that may have hampered real attempts to get out-of-control police under control. Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. And now it's time to indigenize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this has to deal with that laughable case about the completely absurd conspiracy to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, which was so obviously an FBI plot it could have been a really boring movie. It was a case where 12 FBI informants infiltrated a group of 6 and probably even formed it to begin with. Here's a question. If you have twice as many informants as group members, at what point do the FBI informants become the group? And in case you're wondering if this is just going to be a load of crap from a bunch of pro-Trump sore losers, look at the link. This is from BuzzFeed News. They call it a stunning surprise because apparently they haven't been paying attention to it, but now a jury has acquitted 2 of the alleged conspirators despite everything the government did to completely muzzle their defense. The jury was unable to reach a verdict on the other 2, again, after prosecutors in the court broke all the rules to prevent them putting on a defense. The FBI and the prosecution made out this case as one of the most prominent domestic terror investigations in a generation, and considered it a slam dunk. According to the jury, not so much. And the 2 others who chose to plead guilty and testify for the government in exchange for leniency, how is that not witness tampering again? Just might be regretting their decision. 8 others are still up in the air, but they've got to be feeling good about their chances right now. Defense counsel Mike Hills said, quote, "The jury clearly saw what the FBI was doing to create this case. They saw it, and they didn't like it. I think what the FBI did is unconscionable, and I think the jury just sent them a message loud and clear. Whitmer's office was unamused. Her chief of staff, Joanne Hulls, said, quote, "Today, Michiganders and Americans, especially our children, are living through the normalization of political violence. The plot to kidnap and kill a governor may seem like an anomaly, but we must be honest about what it really is. The result of violent, divisive rhetoric that is all too common across our country. There must be accountability and consequences for those who commit heinous crimes. Without accountability, extremists will be emboldened." Blow it out your ear. Federal prosecutors brought in a trove of evidence in the form of hundreds of audio clips, videos, and text messages, plus the testimony of a confidential informant with a long criminal record and who was paid $20,000 for it, as well as the two who had pled guilty. Throughout the trial, and even before it, prosecutors went to extraordinary lengths to exclude exculpatory witnesses and evidence, excluding hundreds of statements from the government's own secret recordings proving there was no conspiracy. The jury also never got to hear that one of the lead FBI agents is guilty of perjury in a different case, and pretty much all of the information about the number of and leading role played by their confidential informants was completely out of bounds for the defense. Prosecutors even threatened one of their own informants, told a potential defense witness he's targeted for prosecution, and had a grand jury indict a second one. They sent the FBI around to hand-deliver subpoenas to numerous friends and associates of the defendants, basically intimidating them into not testifying on behalf of the defendants. Evidence of clear entrapment was withheld from the jury, while comments made in private settings, which should be protected by the First Amendment, would be entered as evidence of a conspiracy that didn't exist. And the fix was in with Judge Robert Jonker, who allowed it all, completely undermining any defense they may have had. He didn't even let them cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses on entrapment. The prosecution over and over again objected to any attempts by defendants to provide context for the quote mines and sound bites shown in court, and all of those were instantly sustained by the judge. I'm only scratching the surface. Read this BuzzFeed News article for lots more examples. And keep in mind, this is the same FBI that organized bombings, gas attacks, drug trafficking, human trafficking, set up child porn websites, and fomented riots. They've never been above entrapment and perjury. When Nietzsche made that comment about the abyss, this is what he was talking about. Or even worse, they don't just become the evil they fight, they need the evil to continue existing. And so if it doesn't exist, they need to create it. Thankfully, the jury saw through it all. Prosecutors lied, they cheated, they threatened and intimidated witnesses, they had a biased and corrupt judge allowing it all, and they still lost. Where was that jury when Ross Ulbricht was on trial? So all of that makes the FBI this week's biggest Bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now let's prestidigitate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to the Prez. Presidents of both parties are generally prone to get this, and Joe Biden is no different. This is his third as president, on top of 2 he got before the election, his first way back in 2011, in addition to 2 biggest Bogon emitters. And I highly doubt this will be his last. He's announced that he's gonna crack down on the Second Amendment, taking the prideful mantle of Barack Obama and just passing by executive order anything he couldn't get passed by Congress. That, in case you're not aware, is the literal meaning of the word dictator, making law by declaring it so, from the Latin dictare, to speak. According to the White House, he's cracking down on ghost guns, which is the spooky name given to guns people make themselves for their own use, which legally don't have to have a serial number or be registered with the ATF. Oh no! What are we going to do about the ghost guns, Scooby? They bleeded. Last year alone, there were approximately 20,000 suspected ghost guns reported to ATF as having been recovered by law enforcement in criminal investigations, a tenfold increase from 2016. Because ghost guns lack the serial numbers marked on other firearms, law enforcement has an exceedingly difficult time tracing a ghost gun found at a crime scene back to an individual purchaser. Because if a criminal purchases a gun, it's completely impossible for him to dremel off the serial number. Quote, "This final rule bans the business of manufacturing the most accessible ghost guns, such as unserialized build-buy-shoot kits that individuals can buy online or at a store without a background check and can readily assemble into a working firearm in as little as 30 minutes with equipment they have at home. If, of course, they're skilled machinists and have specific gunsmithing expertise. Let's be clear, it is not advised to do this yourself unless you are an expert or are supervised by one. Otherwise, the gun you build might be very dangerous to the shooter and bystanders." Not that you'll hear that from Biden's goons. They're happy to pretend that this is basically like IKEA furniture that you can assemble yourself by looking at some weirdly drawn pictures with an Allen wrench. Nothing is further from the truth. Quote, "This rule clarifies that these kits qualify as firearms under the Gun Control Act." Well, they can say that all they want. It doesn't make it so. These guns have always been perfectly legal. He couldn't get it passed in Congress because this has always been legal. Meanwhile, criminals have been buying guns off the black market forever. Congressman Thomas Massey tweeted in response, quote, "The Constitution does not authorize the federal government to prevent you from making your own firearm. That is a fact that has been recognized for 200 plus years." Also, Article 1, Section 1, literally the first operative sentence in the Constitution, says Congress makes law, not POTUS. We've been pointing this out for years, with a sticky thread still available on the old Bogosity forum called The Black Market for Firearms. It shows how easily skilled and knowledgeable people can make guns with basic machinist tools. And of course, Biden had to get in the latest bit of fear-mongering, quote, "This requirement will apply regardless of how the firearm was made, meaning it includes ghost guns made from individual parts, kits, or by 3D printers." Yes, because 3D printers help enable this right, and it is a fundamental human right for the unskilled as well as those with specific skills. By the way, keep in mind that it was under Joe Biden's tenure as VP that the Fast and Furious scandal happened, which proved quite conclusively that serial numbers don't really do a thing to stop anyone from committing crimes. All he's doing is proving all of the rhetoric from him and other leftists about gun manufacturers is absolutely the lie we all said it was. If it's those evil gun manufacturers who are the problem, then why wouldn't it be a good thing that people are making their own guns, completely bypassing them? Because they want nothing less than the absolute banning of all guns in civilian hands. Any rhetoric to the contrary is a lie. This is about control, not safety. It's about making you dependent on them and easy to control by them, which means they can't stand anything that empowers you. So all of that makes Joe Biden this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps wraps up this I've never had anything you doctors didn't try to cure with leeches edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Henry David Thoreau. "We cannot but pity the boy who has never fired a gun. He is no more humane, while his education has been sadly neglected." The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Bogosity. We live in a world where light bulbs connect to the internet, and recent attacks on them prove that your online security is under threat like never before. Not only your websites, but the internet-enabled devices you buy. And the biggest problem is weak passwords. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords on the web and on your internet-enabled devices, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers, all your computers, and even your mobile devices, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, software licenses, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications, manage passwords for your entire family, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now.